About 20 years ago, when our oldest grandchild, our first one, was about 3 years old, little Bethany, we went out to visit with them, her parents' family out in Oklahoma. And of course, as a new grandfather, I had my job cut out for me, didn't I? I'm supposed to be the wise, intelligent, knowledgeable, and I got to share all this with my new little prodigy and teach her all of the things she needs to know about life, right? So I grabbed her little hand and we went for a walk in the neighborhood. And we walked down the sidewalk past a large oak tree. And I looked up and this oak tree was loaded with acorns. So here we go. It's a teaching moment. I reach up and grab a limb and pull it down and I pluck off one of those acorns and I bend down to little Bethany and I says, "Bethany, honey, this is a seed. We call it an acorn. And this big tree makes these seeds. And when it falls to the ground, it can sprout and make another tree. And that's how this tree makes more trees. God planned it that way." And I reach out with the acorn and she cupped her little hands and I dropped the acorn in her little hands. She stood there for a moment staring intently at it. And then she opened her hands and let it drop to the ground. She stared intently at it on the ground. And then she said, "Whoa, make big tree." Yes, it was a learning moment for Granddaddy. But that's the way life is, isn't it? Sometimes we draw conclusions, we expect things based on a minimum or very little experience, very little information. And that causes us sometimes to misplace our faith because our expectations, what we're hoping for, what we're expecting, just doesn't come about the way we thought it would. And even for a 3-year-old, they've got to learn it takes time for that tree to grow. Well, Luke chapter 17, verse 5, we have the parable of the mustard seed. Now, actually, Jesus uses the mustard seed in 2 different parables. This is one of them. The apostle said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." But the Lord said, "If you had faith like a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted into the sea,' and it would obey you." Now, I think in Matthew's account on one occasion, he says you could uproot a mountain and drop it into the sea if you have the faith of a mustard seed. Now, we preachers, in a hurry to come up with some kind of a meaning for this, have adopted one that's been used for so many years that I'm not sure is quite ought to be there. Many of your translations have, in this passage, a faith the size of a mustard seed or as small as a mustard seed. I'm sorry. In the original Greek, as small as the size of, it's not there. It's just like. That's it, okay? The small size concept comes from chapter 13 when Jesus talks about the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed, as small as whatever. And we have transposed those words over into this parable to try to give it some meaning we can grab. And bingo, we got our problem solved. But you know Jesus, when he tells parables, he means for you to go home and munch on it and try to figure it out. He wants you to find a deeper meaning, and it's here. We just have overlooked it sometimes. Is it just the size of the seed he's talking about versus the size of the tree? Well, there's more depth to it than that. The fact is, back in that day and time, there was a tree that's according to what I've read, something they called a mustard tree, and it had a little seed, very small, somewhat different from the mustard plant we know today. But once we take away that meaning, we got a dilemma. Okay, what does this mean? What's Jesus trying to tell us? Does a seed have faith? Does it act on faith? What does it do as a result of this faith if it has? I'm going to go back to an experience I had as a child, and many of you had. If you grew up on a farm or anywhere close by, when the garden came in, every pair of little hands available was drafted to shell peas and shell beans and shell peas and shell beans until your fingernails were raw, it felt like. But that's what we had to do. And if you were like me, once in a while you got curious about something and you say, I wonder what makes this thing grow. And you split open one of those little beans to see what was inside. And you look inside that little bean and you see another little blob of something. And maybe a very tiny little point of a leaf already forming in there. Aha, that's what makes it grow. Well, we still don't have too much information at that point, but we think we know a little better, okay? Here's the point we need to draw from that. Every seed from any plant comes encased in some type of protective hull or shell or pod. That's why we have to shell those beans out of that pod. And that protective shell is what protects it from the outside world until it's ready to do its thing. Now, that little germ inside that seed, or we might call it, the biologist would call it an embryo. If it had a mind and it could think, it could look around and say, wow, look at this neat place I've got. All nice and closed in and protected from everything that's bad out there. And look at this store of food I have here. Wow, I'm just going to kick back and enjoy being a seed. What would happen? In time, that store of food runs out. And when that store of food runs out, life dies with it. That's what happens. God didn't design that seed just to stay a seed. It's supposed to do something different. It has a purpose. It has a design, as well as the shell, as well as the store of food. It's all there for one purpose, one design only. And to make that design happen, it's necessary for that seed to put out a little tiny root that breaks open the pod, breaks open the shell. And have you ever tried to crack a black walnut? Wow, you better have a good hammer or some squirrel's teeth or something. It's hard to get into, but a tiny little root from inside will crack that black walnut shell and open it up. And it reaches out into the world, and its purpose is to grow another one. Okay? Now, what this means is there is something about the seed that is destined to be something else, and it's not what it looks like at that moment. If it tries to achieve any other purpose, any other goal other than what God designed it for, it's going to be death and destruction. Even as it cracks open its pod or shell, it then exposes itself, its comfy, cozy little life and world, to all the dangers that's out there. But it has to do that to do what God designed it for. So where does that put you and me? Did God design us for something? Oh. Now, faith like a seed is going to have to reach out, just like that seed's little root does. It has no clue what's out there outside the shell. But on faith, it has to do what it's designed to do. You and I have no clue what kind of problems and dangers we may run into out there in the world. There's plenty of them, and we've seen some horrible ones here in the last week, haven't we? And yet, that's our designed purpose, to reach out and with righteousness change the world around us. See that? Staying in our shell doesn't get the job done. We have our comfy little cozy routine in our lives. We've built our lives around our work, our hobbies, our enjoyments, our satisfaction, the things we want for ourselves, and we've busied ourselves with all of that stuff, and that's our shell right there, our comfy, cozy world. And we just make sure that, other things don't intrude and destroy what we enjoy. And yet God says, it's time for you to get out there and do something to make the world outside of your comfy, cozy life a better place. See that? There's meaning in here that we've missed all over the place, folks, about what a seed does and how that represents the faith we should have before God and what we should do with our lives. There's a passage in James, that you're familiar with. James chapter 2 and verse 19. You believe that God is one. You do well. The demons also believe and shudder. Let me ask you something. Well, first of all, pay attention. The devil trembles, shudders before the very God in whom you have faith. Have you ever been gobsmacked by the goodness of God? Have you been overwhelmed by the way He's blessed you or people around you, where you were just speechless? Have you ever felt awestruck at the power of righteousness to transform a life? Have you ever trembled, shuddered before Him because you know what your life is and has been? If you've never had any of these experiences, folks, well, let's just ask the question, who has the greater faith, you or the devil? That's a scary thought, isn't it? Look at yourself. Look what you're doing with your life and the world around you. What's your involvement that's carrying you out there? The purpose of a seed is not static at all. And it has a purpose, and you and I have a purpose that goes beyond what we are right now. We're to become something else. Something else that, yes, does have an impact on the world around us. That's the faith of the seed I think Jesus is talking about. If you could just be like the seed, look what you can do. The potential of a seed to grow a tree whose roots can crack foundations of buildings and just, take over is amazing. Your faith can do the same thing. You've just got to understand the power of God, the power of the Holy Spirit that's in you. Now, Jesus wants us to use that faith, and He wants us to break out of our routine, out of our comfort zone. Let me tell you the story of a dear friend of mine in Brazil, José Brito. José was a man who was a laborer for a large construction company. He was married to a sweet lady, wonderful, wonderful, godly lady by the name of Sebastiana. And José, in his work, would be gone for weeks and months at a time. This was a company that built dams and highways and railroads, and they would be off in the middle of nowhere in Brazil or South America someplace. So he'd be gone for long periods of time, come home for a week, and then leave back to work. Send home his money that he would earn. His sweet wife, Sebastiana, was a LPN, a nurse, and she had a full-time job. And when he came home, many times left her pregnant with their next child. They had 6 children. Sebastiana had to hold down a full-time job and raise 6 children with an absentee father. He was home a week every now and then. She asked me to try to meet her husband. She had become a Christian. Asked me to meet her husband, see what I could do to try to convert him. And first time I met with José, he was just kind of closed mouth. Didn't ask any questions, didn't make much comments. He just kind of accepted, what I was saying. I was trying to talk about God and life. And yep, okay, that's fine. Didn't get much farther than that. Next time I met with him, a month or so later, he had a few questions. And that went well. And then he came with Sebastiana once to church, just to spy out the land and see what we were like and what we were about. And then I didn't see him anymore for a while. And then something happened. And this is the way it is sometimes. José was home one day and he decided it was time to go back to his work site. They would have a work camp for the workers, and there he had a place to sleep and food and so forth. So he decided he would go back to his work site. He didn't ask anybody. This wasn't planned. He ran his own show. José, by the way, is about my height, with at least 3 times as much muscle on his frame as I have. He could take care of himself, okay? And he made his own way in life. So Jose packed his bag with some clothes and his favorite few hand tools he liked to use, but he didn't have money for a train ticket. So he looked around the house, and beside the stove, there sat the gas tank. It's just like the ones you use on your outdoor grill, okay? Only that's what we used in Brazil to cook with. And so their stove had a little gas tank by it. He unscrews the gas tank, takes it down to the corner store and sells it, and uses that money to buy a bus ticket into town and to the train station. He comes up to the ticket counter in the train station, and the train is there waiting that he's going to catch. He sets his bag down on the floor. He's paying for his ticket, gets the ticket, reaches down, and it's not there. Somebody has snatched his bag while he's buying a ticket. Livid with rage, he runs all over the train station looking for somebody. The thief carrying his bag, can't find him, runs out in the street, up and down the street, can't find the thief, can't find his bag. He walks back into the train station, and guess what? The train has left the station. He goes to the ticket counter and says, "I want my money back." "Sorry, no redeemed tickets, you missed your train. It's 5 miles back to home." He walks all the way, which gave him plenty of time to think. Because when he gets back home, he knows he's going home to the kids coming home from school, Sebastiana coming home from work, and there's no way to fix supper. He has to fess up to what he did. He can't hide it. And that was a wake-up call. His life had been this routine that was very convenient for him, satisfied him beautifully, in spite of the extra burdens and difficulties he placed on people around him in the process. But suddenly that came tumbling down. And suddenly God showed him, you better look for another way to live. Within a few weeks after that, we baptized Jose. This man became one of the most dedicated daddies I have ever seen in my life. One of the most persistent church members that was there every time the door opened for anything, and he was one of the first ones there every time, especially if there was work to be done. Jose did not know how to read and write. The rest of the story, he did not know it, but shortly before that event, he had contracted a tropical disease, a blood parasite for which there's no cure, which would slowly sap him of his strength and eventually take his life. He had about 10 years left, and he spent every bit of it serving God. Notice the harsh blow it took to wake him up to break out of his shell and reach out and do something for others rather than just for himself. Sometimes that's the way life is. Sometimes we have to have that kind of a shock and a wake-up call. It takes a little harsh prodding. The question then comes back to you and me. Are you living your faith and talking your faith to the people around you? Let's start with your own children. I'm going to confess to you, my generation, we let ourselves be deceived that a few hours at church and a few and kids' activities at church would help their faith grow, and I wouldn't have to worry about them. And we lost over half of our kids to the world. That's what happens if you think you can just let down your guard and build your life like you want. No, it takes a lot more than that. We were horribly wrong. So, how do we try differently? What can you do? How do you what is there about your comfort shell that needs to be broken to get you out there? Where do we need to overcome? Where do we need to reach out? Well, begin by being less absorbed in the things that bring you satisfaction. All right? And we all have these little things to fill up our hours and our days, whether it's football games or whatever. But we need to break out of that and look out to the world and what they need. I want to see every one of us be all that God has designed us to be. Yes. All right? not just what we feel comfortable with. We can make the world change. I have watched the power of righteousness change other lives, and it's absolutely amazing. And I don't care how bad a situation you see out there in the world, at any point in the world, the power of righteousness is still greater than the power of evil anywhere. And it can change lives. It can change situations. It changes Brito. It can change you and me. If you, looking at your life, see that you've walled out too much, you've kept yourself protected from the things that you just don't want to be bothered with, it's time to start breaking your shell. It's time to reach out. No, I can't tell you what's going to happen when you reach out there, but God will provide a way. And I can't tell you the difficulties you'll encounter, but you'll see God working in your life because you'll be doing what God designed you to do. It's that simple. There is, in this sense, a huge lesson of faith in every seed that comes off of every plant. It does what God designed it to do. It's going to reach out, and it's going to, yes, have an impact on the world around it, one way or the other. We can do it. Let's go to Jesus, and let's overcome together. This morning, if you feel like your sin is burdening you down, the structure of your life and the way you've got it is holding you back, and you want power to overcome that, Jesus will give you the power to do that. He really can. You can come to Him for forgiveness. You can come to Him for strength. His Holy Spirit will build you up.